Um, all right, we have a special session, a couple of them anyway, that we're going to be doing. We've just finished up the big book and the first portion of it. We'll be going back to the very beginning here in the next week or two. And so today, one of the things I think that I feel is important, and we're going to do a little bit more reading, and I'm going to ask Bill from time to time to jump in. He's got a pretty good knowledge of what we're about to do, which is to read the story Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And being that he was considered one of the co-founders of AA, I thought it would be important to kind of get to know him a little bit with his story. And that's what we're going to do. So with that, we get started with the third step prayer. And Rob, if you would help me with that, sir, please.
Leo, it would be a pleasure. Welcome, Libby, Andrew, Blaze. Great to see you guys. I'm going to be reading the third step prayer on page 63 of your big book, if you want to follow along. God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way in life. May I do thy will always.
Thank you, Rob. Okay, like I said, we're going to be reading Dr. Bob's Nightmare. And just as an aside, I'm going to call on Rob and Bill to speak a little bit as we kind of read along. And Rob, we don't necessarily, depending on how it reads and everything, we don't have to stop at each and every paragraph, but we'll see how it kind of goes, and we'll move from there.
Okay, perfect. Dr. Bob's Nightmare, which was on page 171, everybody. A co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, the birth of our society dates from his first day of permanent sobriety, June 10th, 1935. To 1950, the year of his death, he carried the AA message to more than 5,000 alcoholic men and women, and to all these he gave his medical services without thought of charge. In this prodigy of service, he was well assisted by Sister Ignatia at St. Thomas Hospital in Akron, Ohio, one of the greatest friends our fellowship will ever know.
Kind of the opening here, a little bit about Dr. Bob. He is considered the one and only person that actually got Bill W. throughout all of those years. He was an incredibly loyal and aligned sidekick with, sidekick's the wrong word, but partner with Bill W. Now, we'll get into it a little bit, but one of the things about Bob, Bob, is that he followed the Oxford group a little bit more closely during his time that working with others for quite a bit longer than what Bill W. did, and he also had a little bit more of a religious approach to it than what ultimately Bill W. did, even though that, as we all know, Bill W. was very much a big advocate of the religious side of things. And we won't get into that part of it since we're talking about Bob. So anyway, Bob, as you guys remember, was his story was that Bill W. was in a hotel, went to a phone and looked at a directory, a church directory, called up a pastor, and the clergy helped him find a person that then brought him to her home. And she said, "I have just the right person for you." And it was Bob. And Bob agreed to meet with Bill. And in fact, as the story goes, Bob said, "I only have about 5 minutes." And what ultimately ended up being, as it goes, is about a 6-hour meeting. And from that point on, Bob never drank again. So it was quite the beginning for both Bill and Bob. And Bob ultimately opened up his home and saved many thousands, as it says here. Rob?
He really did. Dr. Bob was an incredible gentleman, and to be honest, I've stolen an awful lot of what Bill would be saying at this point. So, Bill, I apologize for stealing a lot of your good stuff, but you always have more to share with us. So, AA counts the first day you were sober. So, Dr. Bill gave Dr. Bob one bottle of beer on the day of June 10th, 1935. Gave it to him relatively early in the day. So that one bottle of beer that he gave to him was so he could perform surgery. He was a proctologist. So I don't know if you'd want him operating on you, to be honest with you. But hey, you know what? Bill gave Bob one bottle of beer so he could perform the surgery because he would be really jittery. The beer would have left his system, so we count that as his first day of sobriety, and and the Founder's Day. He was sober 15 years. He was 55 years of age when he got sober. Was born in August 8th, 1879, and he died November 16th, 1950. And that's what I have on Dr. Bob at this moment. And a lot more. As Leo said, he mentioned a couple of things about Bill and Bob meeting for the first time. And as we go into the story, it's going to bring that out. So there's a lot of stuff that it's a great story, and it's our heritage basically. So it's really important. Sorry, Leo.
Go ahead, Rob. That's perfect.
You want me to keep reading, or you want to bring Bill, or?
Yeah, let's bring Bill in real quick, just as for an introduction, because I know he's got some little tidbits that I think everyone will find interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, hi, this is Bill Alcoholic. You guys pretty much said everything you could about this first part. The only thing I can add is, like you said, Bob was more of a religious person than Bill was. Bob was more quiet and laid back, and Bill was the more outspoken guy. So these two guys kind of complemented each other. They just kind of like worked with each other, because one guy was more quiet and one guy was talking more. So it just worked out. If they were both a quiet guy or both a talkative guy, they might not have got along so good. So I believe these two guys were put together by the guy upstairs. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay.
So true, Bill. And one other thing that it says here is that, Bob carried the message to 5,000 alcoholic men and women. That would be a little more than one person a day that he was taking through. Wow. What service this man gave. So let's get into the story. Page 171, everybody. I was born in a small New England village of about 7,000 souls. The general moral standard was, as I recall it, far above the average. No beer or liquor was sold in the neighborhood, except at the state liquor agency, where perhaps one might procure a pint if he could convince the agent that he really needed it. Without this proof, the expectant purchaser would be forced to depart empty-handed, with none of what I later came to believe was the great panacea for all human ills. Men who had liquor shipped in from Boston or New York by express were looked upon with great distrust and disfavor by most of the good townspeople. The town was well supplied with churches and schools in which I pursued my early educational activities.
Well, I'm not familiar with the town. Do you know, Rob?
Yeah, he was born in St. Johnsbury, Vermont, and that was the town that he was born in. My father was a professional man of recognized ability, and both my father and mother were most active in church affairs. Both father and mother were considerably above the average in intelligence. Unfortunately for me, I was the only child, which perhaps engendered the selfishness which played such an important part in bringing on my alcoholism. From childhood through high school, I was more or less forced to go to church, Sunday school and evening service, Monday night Christian endeavor, and sometimes to Wednesday evening prayer meeting. This had the effect of making me resolve that when I was free from parental domination, I would never again darken the doors of a church. This resolution I kept steadfastly for the next 40 years, except when circumstances made it unwise to absent myself.
So there's a good point here. He came from an incredibly religious background, and in a community that prided itself on being a very religious and high moral standards that everybody lived by. I think what is important here is that he would have been a perfect member of what we call the Oxford group. You know, he was a doctor. He would be considered somewhat affluent in that regard, and even though as the alcoholism had taken a hold of him and caused him to almost lose his practice. He basically went from being a very prominent member of of society to being a pariah to a certain extent, just because of the fact that he was so drunk all the time and was unable to perform most of his duties as a doctor. So he fell on bad times, which are hard times, and almost lost, basically almost lost everything. I think it's also interesting that 5,000 people that he approached. You know, there's another sidebar story where Rockefellers had come in and were convinced to basically assist with what Bill and Bob were trying to do. And it turns out that Mr. Rockefeller allowed $5,000 to be given to Dr. Bob. And that, I think, in and of itself was something that was obviously sorely needed. But I think it propped up Dr. Bob, and I think it was enough to give him the breather he needed in order to get himself back on his feet, keep his home, and keep his practice. Not to mention the fact that he used it wisely with regard to helping other people and getting them sober. And I think it's worth talking about the the hospital that he worked with. Back then, you know, it was a very close relationship between Alcoholics Anonymous, which at the time was not called Alcoholics Anonymous in the very beginning. They were part of what is known as the Alcoholic Squad within the Oxford group. And the meetings that they had, just as an aside, included people that were non-alcoholics, and it also included spouses. So you can imagine that if you had 10 or 15 drunks coming in with their spouses, and then you had additional people that were from the Oxford group just being a part of the meeting and stuff, you can easily see how they could have expanded from 30 to 50 people without even trying very hard at all. But what I was trying to get at is that Dr. Bob would work with the hospital, and that he used the hospital as a facility to help dry out drunks in the very beginning, such as what we would call today as a rehab. He would find an open bed that was at the hospital, tell him that he had a case or a patient that he wanted to have dry out, and they opened their doors and allowed him to do that. Now, there's also a part where they were a bit reluctant in the beginning, but once they started seeing the results of what Dr. Bob was able to do, they actually joined forces and started to be a lot more proactive with that. Rob?
Excellent. Now, Dr. Bob's father and mother were both highly educated. Dr. Bob's father was a judge, at times was the state's attorney. He was a member of the state legislature, was superintendent of the schools at one point, director of a bank, then a president of a bank, and he also taught Sunday school. And his mother was a teacher. So very highly educated parents that he's coming from. After high school came 4 years in one of the best colleges in the country, where drinking seemed to be a major extracurricular activity. Almost everyone seemed to do it. I did it more and more and had lots of fun without much grief, either physical or financial. I seemed to be able to snap back the next morning better than most of my fellow drinkers, who were cursed or perhaps blessed with a great deal of morning after nausea. Never once in my life have I had a headache, which fact leads me to believe that I was an alcoholic almost from the start. My whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do, without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else, a state of mind which became more and more predominant as the years passed. I was graduated summa cum laude in the eyes of the drinking fraternity, but not in the eyes of the dean.
I guess that's pretty funny. Is that typical or not for colleges and universities to have a sidebar extracurricular activity that's full of drinking? I know that that was certainly the case when I was going to school. And I can tell you that back in the day when I was young and in college, the drinking age in the state that I was growing up in was still 18 years old. So from the very beginning, as soon as you graduated high school and were basically turned 18, you were allowed to drink alcohol. So at least beer anyway. So from that, I can tell you that college was a whole different experience for me than it was, say, for others, where it became when the drinking age was finally settled in us at 21. But nonetheless, I find it interesting too, is his ability to snap back the next morning. I think that is both the as he said, the blessing and or curse of the young, because it does actually set you up to think that you're invincible. And I think that does contribute to you thinking that drinking is just fine and okay. Whereas most, I think, actually outgrow that phase of their lives and go on to be normal, as we call it in AA, which we all are still baffled at. With regard to how people can be that normal and be able to leave the drink alone anytime and every time that they want. But with that, I will turn it over to Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Leo. Then I was high school with St. Johnsbury Academy High School, and the college that he was going to was Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. Summa cum laude is with highest distinction, just to throw that in. And that's, as you say, Leo, it's a curse, and in one sense, because the people that are getting sick when they're drinking or after they've had more than they need, get to the point where, you know what, I don't enjoy this anymore. When you don't have any consequences, we keep going. Hey, the only thing that brought me into the rooms or the fellowship of AA was the consequences that I was living with. But when you have no consequences, boy, must be nice. The next 3 years I spent in Boston, Chicago, and Montreal in the employ of a large manufacturing concern, selling railway supply, gas engines of all sorts, and many other items of heavy hardware. During these years, I drank as much as my purse permitted, still without paying too great a penalty, although I was beginning to have morning jitters at times. I lost only a half day's work during these 3 years.
Okay, so this is an interesting kind of progression we'll talk about here in regards to his drinking and having beginning of the jitters. It looks like he was able to be what they call a high functioning alcoholic, in that he was drinking heavily, but at the same time, he was able to get up the next morning and be at work by 8 or 9, whatever time that was, and be able to actually execute his job in a manner in which that was more than acceptable. And so, and the other part is he was also apparently living within his means, meaning that he wasn't, he was taking care of all of his responsibilities, such as, let's call it rent and utilities and food and that type of thing. And at the same time, drinking without messing that much up as well. So only missing a half day's work over the 3 years. I think all of us can say at times when we had, quote, some level of control, and I use that word loosely because I know that when I was growing up, and I do mean this sincerely, in the Marine Corps, there was a lot of hard work that was executed on a daily basis, but there was a lot of hard drinking that was happening at night. But there was this kind of rule that, you could, what we called it, you could hoot with the owls, but you still had to be able to soar with the eagles the next day. And so that was a mantra that we lived by. And we actually kind of watched out for each other because we wanted everybody to be at work on time, doing their job and executing it to the best of their abilities. But at the same time at night, we wanted to be able to let loose and and drink fairly heavily. And that was my life for the better part of a quarter of a century. What a deal was that. Rob?
Yeah, the thing is that he was beginning to have morning jitters at times. The progression is beginning, and it doesn't take long for it to keep going. We're on page 173, everybody. My next move was to take up the study of medicine, entering one of the largest universities in the country. There I took up the business of drinking with much greater earnestness than I had previously shown. On account of my enormous capacity for beer, I was elected to membership in one of the drinking societies and soon became one of the leading spirits. Many mornings I have gone to classes, and even though fully prepared, would turn and walk back to the fraternity house because of my jitters, not daring to enter the classroom for fear of making a scene should I be called on for recitation.
It's an interesting thing here. He is missing class. I think we also understand that Bill W., who was going to law school, actually didn't finish his law degree because of the fact that he was a drunk and couldn't actually go to and execute or actually get through the exams. Well, in this case, Dr. Bob was at least successful enough that he was able to get through med school, and obviously, as we all know, became a doctor and a proctologist at that. But his enormous capacity for beer and a membership in one of the drinking societies, and soon became one of the leading spirits. Certainly a nice play on words as we're reading this. But in the end, he is starting to feel the effects, and the effects are starting to creep up on him because of the fact that he's unable to make it to class and for fear of being found out. Rob?
Yeah, he was going to the University of Michigan Medical School, class of 1905. So this went from bad to worse until sophomore spring, when, after a prolonged period of drinking, I made up my mind that I could not complete my course. So I packed my grip and went south to spend a month on a large farm owned by a friend of mine. When I got the fog out of my brain, I decided that quitting school was very foolish and that I'd better return and continue my work. When I reached school, I discovered the faculty had other ideas on the subject. After much argument, they allowed me to return and take my exams, all of which I passed creditably. But they were much disgusted and told me that they would attempt to struggle along without my presence. After many painful discussions, they finally gave me my credits, and I migrated to another of the leading universities of the country and entered as a junior that fall.
Okay, so he is basically doing what we consider as a month of drying out, working on a farm. He leaves the university. I always think it's interesting. I think back in that time, leaving the university for a period of time was a lot more acceptable than it is today. I know that if you were in a semester of school and missed a month, you would have essentially, one, withdrawn from school and have to reapply, and two, you would have lost everything for that semester. So I think that things were a bit different back in those days. And I know it seems to me that the faculty were more involved with each of the individual students than they probably are today. Now, that may not be true for some of the smaller colleges and universities. But nonetheless, he found himself able to at least get through his sophomore year. They decided that they would let him take his exams, but they also decided that they no longer wanted him to be a part of the university. So he had to pack his bags and, as they say, move on. So, Rob?
He missed a month of classes, Leo. A month of classes. Wrote his exams and still passed them.
Right.
This man is smart. To go on a geographical cure, to get better or to dry out or do whatever, to miss a month of classes and still pass. That astounds me. It just goes to show that this, he's a smart person. He has the ability, but alcohol just gets in the way of the things that, we have to do. Wow. He went to the next university that he goes to is Rush University in Chicago. Benjamin Rush signed the Declaration of Independence the doctor who wrote a paper on alcoholism theory that alcohol was not a moral issue, but a disease. So a little information on Benjamin Rush there. So we're on page 174, everybody. Coming up to final exams, I went on a particularly strenuous spree. When I went in to write the examination, my hands trembled so I could not hold a pencil. I passed in at least 3 absolutely blank books. I was, of course, soon on the carpet, and the upshot was that I had to go back for 2 more quarters and remain absolutely dry if I wished to graduate. This I did and proved myself satisfactory to the faculty, both in deportment and scholastically.
Okay, so again, we're watching a progression of his alcoholism. At the same time, as we all know, he's not really sober in these 2 quarters that he actually was dry. We actually have come to know that as being a dry drunk, and kind of what I would call the white knuckling effect. But he had enough motivation to stay dry for 2 short periods of time, and in doing so, was able to actually finish his schooling. Rob?
Yeah, he stayed dry. You know, there are times where we can white knuckle it. But then what usually happens, we end up going on a spree to end all sprees. When those 2 years were up, I opened an office downtown. I had some money, all the time in the world, and considerable stomach trouble. I soon discovered that a couple of drinks would alleviate my gastric distress, at least for a few hours at a time. So it was not at all difficult for me to return to my former excessive indulgence.
Right. Okay. So real quick here, one of the things that's important to note here, and this is more from a medical standpoint, is that, you get down to a certain level, and you're unable to function, and quite miraculously, a couple of drinks will bring you back up to a sense of calm and the ability to function. And true alcoholics, in some manner or fashion, usually need a couple of drinks to calm their jitters and their nerves. And so a lot of them will find themselves drinking in the morning in order to be able to function throughout the day. I know for me, those jitters became a normal thing. And some of you have heard my story where I actually went to a neurologist, and was diagnosed with a tremor, and was given medication in order to control that tremor. And it was about 9 months after I stopped drinking that I started realizing that I didn't need that medication anymore, because the jitters, or the tremor as it was not present. And so what I have now come to know, and 2 doctors have actually confirmed with me, is that I was going through withdrawal on a daily basis, and I was actually medicating for that withdrawal, thinking it was something else than what it really was. And so now I am completely off that medication for that tremor. In fact, I don't have the tremors anymore. But it took 9 months for my body to actually improve for that. So I say that just so that you, when I was going throughout the day and I started feeling the jitters a little stronger than normal, I would turn to a couple of glasses of wine or a drink in order to calm those jitters. So I can relate full-heartedly with what he is saying here. Rob?
Bill, I have to apologize. I missed a part here that is so important that I do apologize to everybody, and I'm going to go back one little bit that I missed.
Perfect.
Okay, I conducted myself so creditably that I was able to secure a much coveted internship in a Western city where I spent 2 years. During these 2 years, I was kept so busy that I hardly left the hospital at all. Consequently, I could not get into any trouble.
Okay. And
and in that city that he goes to is Akron, Ohio, the city hospital of Akron. He was so busy that he didn't drink. He doesn't have to drink every day. Just no time to drink. So he stayed dry. When he drank, He couldn't control it. Here, didn't drink, so he didn't have to worry about it. Sorry, Leo, you want to throw in some stuff there?
No, nope, go ahead.
Okay, so now I'm going to read what I've read already, and I'll keep going. When those 2 years were up, I opened an office downtown. I had some money, all the time in the world, and considerable stomach trouble. I soon discovered that a couple of drinks would alleviate my gastric distress, at least for a few hours at a time, so it was not at all difficult for me to return to my former excessive indulgence. By this time, I was beginning to pay very dearly physically, and in the hope of relief, voluntarily incarcerated myself at least a dozen times in one of the local sanitariums. I was between Skillam and Kilribdas now, because if I did not drink, my stomach tortured me, and if I did, my nerves did the same thing. After 3 years of this, I wound up in the local hospital where they attempted to help me, but I would get my friends to smuggle me a quart, or I would steal the alcohol about the building, so that I got rapidly worse.
Okay, so this is getting to be pretty bad for a person and certainly for Dr. Bob. I know, Rob, you probably know what Scylla and Charybdis is now. So I'm going to let you explain that. But if you can see here where he was supposed to be getting better, but he had people actually bringing alcohol into him. So the very fact that he was there basically was just taking a break from work, if you will, and still getting the alcohol he needed or wanted.
Yep.
Rob?
So Scylla is a rock on the Italian side of the Strait of Messina, opposite the whirlpool. Charybdis, personified by Homer as a female sea monster who devoured sailors. So between Scylla and Charybdis is being in a spot where avoidance of one danger exposes one to destruction by the other. So being between a rock and a hard place. And people are probably thinking of the Rolling Stones song now. And they've
Yep.
got that earworm going through. So being between a rock and a hard place, whichever way you go, you're in trouble. So he's got stomach problems, which also, if we remember in the doctor's opinion, Hank Parkhurst was in the hospital for gastric problems too, I believe, gastric hemorrhage. Just goes to show, the body is starting to break down because of the alcohol. He's in hospital to get better. He puts himself into the hospital to get better, but he's got his friends bringing in alcohol. Or he's stealing it, wherever he can find it. So here we go on that hamster wheel. We're trying to get better, but we got to have the alcohol, which is making us worse. You can't win for losing it when you're in this position. Finally, my father had to send a doctor out from my hometown, managed to get me back there in some way. And I was in bed about 2 months before I could venture out of the house. I stayed about town a couple of months more and then returned to resume my practice. I think I must have been thoroughly scared by what had happened, or by the doctor, or probably both, so that I did not touch a drink again until the country went dry.
Okay, we'll keep going, Rob.
Okay. When the country went dry, that was Prohibition, June 1, 1920. And it lasted until December 1933. With the passing of the 18th Amendment, I felt quite safe. I knew everyone would buy a few bottles or cases of liquor at their exchequers permitted, and that it would soon be gone. Therefore, it would make no great difference, even if I should do some drinking. At that time, I was not aware of the almost unlimited supply the government made it possible for us doctors to obtain. Neither had I any knowledge of the bootlegger who soon appeared on the horizon. I drank with moderation at first, but it took me only a relatively short time to drift back into the old habit, which had wound up so disastrously before.
Yeah, so the important message here, so he's somewhat dried out. He's at a point where he thinks that he now has control over his drinking, as we've talked about so frequently in the first portion of the book. And he starts out with somewhat of a somewhat moderate. Okay, and so he is basically able to say, I'm only going to drink 2 or 3 or 4 drinks I'm only drinking during the evening. I'm only drinking on the weekends, whatever that he might have told himself. But over a period of time, he quickly returned back to his old self and was drinking excessively. And I would also surmise that he probably was starting to drink more than he had before, because that seems to be the progression of everyone as the disease that we have progresses, that you get worse and worse and worse. Bob?
Yeah, Bob thought he's going to be fine because he wouldn't be able to get it. So you stock up a few cases here and there, and then you figure when that's all gone, I'm over, I'm done with. Not realizing that bootleggers would appear on the horizon, and also doctors could write prescriptions for any alcohol that they wanted. So here he is trying to control and enjoy his drinking. The only people that are trying to control somebody that's out of control. That's the hard part. During the next few years, I developed two distinct phobias. One was the fear of not sleeping, and the other was the fear of running out of liquor. Not being a man of means, I knew that if I did not stay sober enough to earn money, I would run out of liquor. Most of the time, therefore, I did not take the morning drink, which I craved so badly, but instead would fill up on large doses of sedatives to quiet the jitters, which distressed me terribly. Occasionally, I would yield to the morning craving, but if I did, it would be only a few hours before I would be quite unfit for work. This would lessen my chances of smuggling some home that evening, which in turn would mean a night of futile tossing around in bed, followed by a morning of unbearable jitters. During the subsequent 15 years, I had sense enough never to go to the hospital if I had been drinking, and very seldom did I receive patients. I would sometimes hide out in one of the clubs of which I was a member, and in the habit at times of registering at a hotel under a fictitious name. But my friends usually found me, and I would be home if they promised that I should not be scolded.
Okay, so wow, these are really progressing to a point where he doesn't have any patience anymore, and I'm talking people, and he's going for periods of time, whether they're short or long times, not being at the hospital to do the work that he's supposed to be doing. And it does say at the very beginning here is that not being a man of means, he was running out of money and his ability to function. But he was also running out of friends, albeit there were a few still around that were helping him out and everything. But I can tell you that because of his reputation, I'm sure that he was finding himself without the comfort of the friends, and he was finding it more and more the people that were in the clubs that he was frequenting. And oh, by the way, it must be something to have to check into a hotel under a fictitious name.
Especially when your name's Bob Smith.
That's right. Yep. Go ahead, Rob.
I found that hilarious anyways. If my wife was planning to go out in the afternoon, I would get a large supply of liquor and smuggle it home and hide it in the coal bin, the closed chute, over door jambs, over beams in the cellar, and in cracks in the cellar tile. I also made use of old trunks and chests, the old can container, and even the ash container. The water tank on the toilet I never used because that looked too easy. I found out later that my wife inspected it frequently. I used to put 8 or 12-ounce bottles of alcohol in a fur-lined glove and toss it onto the back airing porch when winter days got dark enough. My bootlegger had hidden alcohol at the back steps where I could get it at my convenience. Sometimes I would bring it in my pockets, but they were inspected, and that became too risky. I used also to put it up in 4-ounce bottles and stick several in my stocking tops. This worked nicely until my wife and I went to see Wallace Berry and Tugboat Annie, after which the pant leg and stocking racket were out. I will not take space to relate all my hospital or sanitarium experiences.
Okay, really here, this is a common thing that I've heard, and I'm sure all of you have heard, is that now we progress to the point that we're trying to hide our alcohol and hide our drinking. And as you all know, that was a big thing for me. And it was one that I thought for sure you weren't going to be able to find it And in fact, I even forgot some of the places that I had hit it. And for a few months after I had stopped drinking, I would be doing something and all of a sudden I would open something up and there was another bottle or another container, if you will, of alcohol. And it surprised me. Now, the problem is that in those first couple of months that I was trying to stop drinking, I also found this alcohol, and after some consideration, I let myself talk myself into drinking again. So it was an unfortunate scenario that I thought, oh, nobody's going to know, and I can drink, and unfortunately, every time I was found out. Now, the problem with that is that destroys trust. And I think it's an important note here with regard to this hiding and, quote, ultimately lying about your drinking in regards to that, because on the surface, or at least what you're trying to portray, is that you're no longer drinking, yet you really are. And I don't care what kind of alcohol it is, people will either know because they smell it, they'll know because of the way you're acting and or the way you're talking. It doesn't really matter. They're going to find out. And if you're sitting there telling them that you're not drinking and yet they know you are, you can see where that trust is destroyed. And it's one of the areas in my life, for example, which was the hardest to overcome and build back. And as everybody knows, that if you start out with 100% trust, once you've broken that, there is never and no way you can get back to 100%. You can only get most of it back, but there's always going to be that element of doubt, which is something that you have to take responsibility for and know that that's happened. So we've got a situation here where Dr. Bob's wife was inspecting his pockets. She was inspecting different places throughout the house. I'm sure when she found the alcohol, there was some level of confrontation, and this became somewhat problematic for their relationship. And that is also a common theme that we still know and hear of today. So very much into the throes of that, what we are clearly knowing as the consequences, if you will, of being an alcoholic. Rob?
Yeah, I just want to say, here's Dr. Bob hiding alcohol everywhere. Can you identify with hiding liquor? Normal drinkers don't hide liquor all over the house.
I sure don't.
Yep. And he will not take space to relate all my hospital or sanitarium experiences. So he was in and out of these places, and similar to Towns Hospital, the people that went in quite a few times, alcoholics of our type weren't getting the help that they needed. They need a spiritual experience. Drying out isn't enough. Fear, and self-knowledge aren't good enough to cut it. We need a spiritual experience. During all this time, we became more or less ostracized by our friends. We could not be invited out because I would surely get tight, and my wife dared not invite people in for the same reason. My phobia for sleeplessness demanded that I get drunk every night. But in order to get more liquor for the next night, I had to stay sober during the day, at least up to 4 o'clock. This routine went on with few interruptions for 17 years. It was really a horrible nightmare. Just earning money, getting liquor, smuggling it home, getting drunk, morning jitters, taking large doses of sedatives to make it possible for me to earn more money, and so on ad nauseum. I used to promise my wife, my friends, and my children that I would drink no more. Promises which seldom kept me sober even through that day, though I was very sincere when I made them.
Okay, so yet another progression of the alcoholism. The fact is he's in this terrible loop that he can't break out from. But it would be the two other things that are highlighted here. One is that they start to withdraw from their friends and family because of the fact that Dr. Bob would get drunk and probably embarrass himself and others, so that they began to socialize less and less, which is a common sign of people that are really into their progression of alcoholism. And then the second thing here is making those promises. As we all know, every one of us has promised somebody along the way that we are not going to drink again. And just to find whether it's ourselves or others, And I think sometimes we break the promises to ourselves before we break them to others. And that is that you're not going to drink ever again. And the next thing you know, it's within just a few hours or a few minutes, you find yourself drinking again. So, Rob?
Yeah, you know, Bill's losing, or I'm sorry, Bill. Bob is losing his friends. Who else did that? Bill. Bill became a lone wolf. Stories are eerily similar, in the fact that, two very, very intelligent men being taken down by alcohol. 17 years, Dr. Bob did this routine of you have to go to work, make money, buy liquor, smuggle it home, trying to hide it from his wife, finding all these hiding spots, drinking it, then taking sedatives so he could get to work. Repeat for 17 years. Boy, what a life. Not much of a life, He has no solution. And until he gets a solution, he's going to keep repeating this pattern over and over again. How many times have we promised that we're never going to drink again? But the mental insanity wins. We have no defense against that first drink we're taught earlier in the book. For the benefit of those experimentally inclined, I should mention the so-called beer experiment. When beer first came back, I thought that I was safe. I could drink all that I wanted of that. It was harmless. Nobody ever got drunk on beer. So I filled the cellar full. With the permission of my good wife, it was not long before I was drinking at least a case and a half a day. I put on 30 pounds of weight in about 2 months. Looked like a pig and was uncomfortable from shortness of breath. It then occurred to me that after one was all smelled up with beer, nobody could tell what had been drunk. So I began to fortify my beer with straight alcohol. Of course, the result was very bad, and that ended the beer experiment.
Yeah. So just another, this is such a cautionary tale with regard to people's progression in their alcoholism. And I think the distinction here and why the story is so important is I think that we're all finding something in here that we can relate to with regard to our own drinking, our own escapades, and our own progression of the disease as we maneuvered through our lives, whether we were able to be fortunate enough to figure it out in our late 20s, early 30s, and were able to get sober after that, or with some of us, we didn't really get it until we were in our 50s or 60s and beyond. The fact is that we are reading something of showing one person's progression through the disease, and I know that I can relate to quite a bit of this as my own story would almost repeat more than half of what happened here. Rob?
Yeah, the only thing I'll throw in here is liquor is quicker. Beer takes a case and a half of beer. That's a lot of beer. I was at a meeting the other day, and somebody said that they had a 12-ounce thing of water, and they were having a hard time getting through it. But then they thought about all the 6-packs of beer that they could drink, in a very short period of time. They couldn't drink 12 ounces of water, but drinking 12 ounces of beer was a snap. So liquor is quicker. It takes you to where you want to be. About the time, and also you don't put on as much weight. You put on weight, but you don't put on as much weight as all the beer you're putting in. About the time of the beer experiment, I was thrown in with a crowd of people who attracted me because of their seeming poise, health, and happiness. They spoke with great freedom from embarrassment, which I could never do, and they seemed very much at ease on all occasions and appeared very healthy. More than these attributes, they seemed to be happy. I was self-conscious and ill at ease most of the time. My health was at the breaking point, and I was thoroughly miserable. I sensed they had something I did not have, from which I might readily profit. I learned that it was something of a spiritual nature, which did not appeal to me very much, but I thought it could do no harm. I gave the matter much time and study for the next 2.5 years, but I still got tight every night nevertheless. I read everything I could find and talked to everyone who I thought knew anything about it.
Go ahead, Rob, on what you've got for what this group is.
Okay. This is the Oxford group, 1933, that Bob has got involved in. Okay. Bob didn't identify with these people. Bob identified with Bill, which we're going to find out a little bit later as we keep reading, which is why Bill got through to him. You know, the Oxford group, they just didn't drink like he did. Okay, so there was no identification. Okay, so Bob didn't have a solution at this point. My wife became deeply interested, and it was her interest that sustained mine, though I at no time sensed that it might be an answer to my liquor problem. How my wife kept her faith and courage during all those years, I'll never know, but she did. If she had not, I know I would have been dead a long time ago. For some reason, we alcoholics seem to have the gift of picking out the world's finest women. Why they should be subjected to the tortures we inflict upon them, I cannot explain.
Yeah, this is good for anybody that has a spouse, whether it's your wife or your husband, or a boyfriend, girlfriend, or just a partner that is going through life with you, and the amount of trial and tribulation that they go through, the angst and everything else that they are subjected to, and yet with what they use the word torture. That they have been inflicted upon, and they still stay the course. They still stand by your side, and they're still trying their darndest to get you to stop drinking and live a sober life. Rob?
Yeah, 17 years, Bob's, sneaking in liquor, sedatives, all this stuff, and his wife sticking by his side. Thank God for Mrs. Smith. About this time, a lady called up my wife one Saturday afternoon, saying she wanted me to come over that evening to meet a friend of hers who might help me. It was the day before Mother's Day, and I had come home plastered, carrying a big potted plant, which I set down on the table and forthwith went upstairs and passed out. The next day she called again. Wishing to be polite, though I felt very badly, I said, let's make the call, and extracted from my wife a promise that we would not stay over 15 minutes.
Yep, this is the story that we were talking about a little bit earlier. I'll let you go ahead and take it from this part, Rob, this woman.
Okay, this woman is Henrietta Seiberling. And if we remember that Bill was at the hotel in Akron, Ohio, his business deal had fallen through. And Bill, moment of truth, I guess, I don't know how else to put it. Bill could either go to the bar, have a ginger ale, or maybe he's been sober 6 months, maybe he can have 3 drinks. Or he could go to the hotel phone and make a call to help another alcoholic. Bill's decision was he called Reverend Trunks, whose name was on the list. Trunks gave him Henrietta Seiberling's phone number, and Henrietta said, we've been waiting for somebody like you to help out Dr. Bob. And so this is where a God-inspired moment. And if you don't get chills with this, I don't know.
Rob, we're at 12:53. I think this is actually a good stopping point. I was hoping to get through the whole story, but we'll save this last part where Bill W. gets involved. I'm going to ask Bill, our other friend, to say a few words and kind of give us a review before we finish things up today.
Hi, this is Bill, alcoholic. Yeah, this is really a good story here because it's one of our co-founders. And basically what you can see through here is the progression that Dr. Bob went through. And like Rob pointed out, he was a very intelligent person. He was capable of passing all of his tests and becoming a doctor and starting his own practice and getting everything he needed to get done, except he just couldn't stop drinking. He tried moderation. Every time he tried that, he thought he was only going to drink 2 or 3 drinks and that would be it. And we can't do that. Once you cross the line and you're an alcoholic, you try to drink in moderation, you take a couple of drinks and the phenomenon of cravings kicks in, and you might be able to white knuckle it a few times, but sooner or later you're going to be off to the races and right back drinking the way you were before, if not worse. Because the disease progresses, we drink progressively worse and worse and worse. And that's what was happening to him. He even tried this beer experiment. He thought he was just going to drink beer, and he winds up drinking a case and a half of it every day. So, you see, we're not beeraholics. We're not wineaholics. We're not whiskeyaholics. We're alcoholics. Anything with alcohol in it is going to make us want more. And that's what happened to him. And then he got the brilliant idea he could fortify the beer by adding some straight alcohol to it. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that we do. And that's what Bob was doing. And every time he tried trying to come up with a new idea, try to outsmart it, you can't outsmart alcoholism. Once alcoholism has a hold of you, it's centered in your mind. So the alcoholism can outsmart you because it's already in your mind. It's not something outside of you, it's inside of us. And we can't get away with it. And that's what Bob is trying to do here. He can't get away with it. And then thank God that Bill got sober, and Bill called up this Reverend Tunks and finally got a hold of Dr. Bob. And you see what happened was when he called Reverend Tunks didn't know any alcoholics. So he gave Bill 10 phone numbers. Bill called all those numbers, and they didn't know any alcoholics. But one of the people that he called, a guy named Norman Shepard, knew Henrietta Seiberling, and he said, I'll give you Henrietta's number because she's trying to help somebody who can't stop drinking. So the people in the Oxford group, there was almost no alcoholics in the Oxford group, at least out in Akron, at least in the area that Bill was in trying to call people. So that's why when Dr. Bob was in the Oxford group, he wasn't identifying with anybody there because there really was no alcoholics for him there to identify with. You see, over in New York, it was a little bit different. You had Roland Hazard and Seba Graves. They brought Ebby Thatcher to the Oxford group, and they were both alcoholics, and Ebby was an alcoholic. So all these people could identify with each other. Bob was kind of sitting there alone, just, listening to people that wanted to stop sinning and go to heaven. And all Bob wanted to do was stop drinking, and nobody knew how to do that. So that's pretty much where he was at this point until Bill got a hold of him. That's all I got. Thanks a lot for letting me share.
Thank you, Bill. I really appreciate it. And
Thanks, Bill.
just as an aside, our Bill here has his own big book study, and it's a very historical oriented type of big book study, and it's one that I attend every Friday, and a few of us in this room actually go to it as well. And we've posted that Zoom ID and time for when it actually occurs on Fridays. So I encourage everybody to go. It's an excellent history lesson as much as it is a good opportunity to read the big book. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and close things out. We'll do that with the Serenity Prayer, Rob, and then we'll open it up for a little bit of discussion. Thank you.
Perfect. Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference.